Good morning and welcome back. Welcome back to Ribbon Candy Hooking. I'm Deana. Happy Halloween. Before I forget, I want to be sure that you see that I am as festive as I can be without getting arrested. I mean, this is ridiculous. Good to see you all. Happy Halloween, spooky edition, our last spooky edition. I think it was a fun idea and a great idea to do a lot of spooky episodes this month. So I'm hoping that everyone's enjoying them. I'm sure not everyone is enjoying them because not everybody's into the Halloween thing. But this is our last spooky episode before we transition back to our regular coffee time and cocktail time programming. But I am looking forward to today's episode. I'm not feeling particularly spooky, and that must change because I just have a matter of hours before it's time to get costumes on and go trick or treating. I'm not even sure that I am set with the costumes for the kids, but I suppose because they've already done two Halloween parties, I guess we must be there. It's me who is not quite Halloweened up yet, and probably will have to do some sewing this afternoon. Holy mackerel, Kirsten, great to see you. I love to see all of those pumpkins out there. Do we have to lose the pumpkins after Halloween? Because I mean, don't pumpkins transition nicely into American Thanksgiving too? I know our Canadian friends have already had their Thanksgiving. But I just feel like some of this stuff, this is not going to transition. This is going to go into the closet where it belongs until next Halloween. But I'm thinking there's a lot of things that are kind of borderline things that I might leave up for a little while. We'll see what happens. Linda, great to see you. Happy Halloween. Crystal, happy Halloween. Great to see you. Sent my ringtail to lemur to was she dressed? Oh my god. Thelma was dressed up as a ringtail lemur. That is so funny. Yeah, the costume requests can be absolutely crazy. I'm so lucky this year. I mean, I have a degree in costume, so I could pull off pretty much any costume. The kids do not challenge me in this way, and it's in a way disappointing. In another way, it's a bit of a relief. Teddy changed his costumes every year. He changes right up to the day, and he was the other day at the Halloween party like the Scream character again because he really likes that long face. It reminds him of the painting The Scream. I think it's supposed to be called Phantom Face, but it's basically The Scream. He's obsessed with that painting still, so he was that. But tonight he would like to be a ghost holding a meat hook with a patch on his eye. So I think I'm going to have to get some sheeting or some white fabric or something to make that happen. But it's like the morning of, and of course Jocelyn is going to be a pretty scarecrow, and I am a creepy scarecrow. So I got the creepy, she got the pretty. I've got to figure out what kind of ponchos we're going to wear later because it should be a nice, crisp night for trick or treating. How much fun is that? And we live in the best trick or treating neighborhood, I think, in the world. It really is. Everybody has their yards decorated just over the top. People actually come in from all parts of the state and trick or treat in our neighborhood because it's really that good. It's just unreal. The houses are very close together, but they're all Yale people, so everybody has some money and buys the nice candy bars and snacks. And for the kids, it's just, I mean, it's incredible. But you don't trick or treating, you don't see any kids that because there's so many kids who are around who are not local kids, which is fine because they should have a fun Halloween as well. But it is going to be an absolutely wild night, I am sure. Karen, great to see you. Happy Halloween. Ryan, happy Halloween. Candy for breakfast. Good for you. They have all those cute cakes out now too, like the Little Debbie's type cakes at the grocery store with the orange sprinkles and the black and orange stripies. Everything is so attractive and festive right now. April, great to see you. Carol, great to see you in Wisconsin. I've been looking at some beautiful pieces on our Facebook page, which is Rug Hooking and Punch Needle Club. A lot of people posting some lovely Halloween work. I think that might eclipse Madcap Monday on our page because Monday is the day that everybody's allowed to sell and offer for sale things that they have. Supplies, finished products, anything, patterns. But I think today we are rightfully being eclipsed by Halloween imagery, which is definitely the right day for it. That'll be super fun. Ryan says the Fox sisters and the Lizzie Borden stories. That's where we're headed today. I thought let's have a Victorian mayhem last Halloween episode on Halloween Day, where I will catch you up on the content I didn't get to on Friday night cocktail night for the Fox sisters, because that is a great story that I am just learning about for the first time. The Lizzie Borden story I know quite well. And I've known that story for years, and I have a real clear theory for myself about it. So, two great mysteries to solve tonight. If you are feeling today. If you are feeling like an amateur sleuth, this is going to be a great episode for you. My tie-in with rugs is that both of these are patterns at Ribbon Candy Hooking. The Fox Sisters, I don't think I have an image of it here, but it's as a thumbnail. I colored it as a thumbnail for today's episode. And the Lizzie Borden rug, which I've been working on. I've got pictures for you later, but I've been working on this rug for 2 years. This is just how it goes with me. Time is a real thing. So yeah, it's going to be a fun episode talking about theories and what you might know about these stories. And I was sent a few interesting things in between over the weekend that I can add to today's episode. Happy Halloween, Shannon. Great to see you. Anita, happy Halloween. Cats Gallery, happy Halloween. And good morning in Southern California. Barbara, great to see you. And Karen. Doreen, great to see you. Dave, happy Halloween, great to see you. Trick or treat, smell your feet. The kids still say that too. Robyn, great to see you. Barb, happy Halloween. Andrea, happy Halloween. And Cindy. Oh, Rebecca, you are on. Max loves Scream too. So funny. Our boys are so much alike. It's crazy. So fun. Oh man, let me see. The Fox Sisters. Oh, Doreen says the Fox Sisters. Wait a minute. Getting cut off with my building is just 2 miles. Oh, are you kidding me? It's that close to you. That is so funny. I also got, I'm not going to start quite yet, but another Linda in the group who must be local, I'm going to have to read this email later, sent something about the Fox House too. I wonder how close you two are because you are within that very tight radius of the house. I have not been up there yet, so that's going to be on my to-do list. Even though they were proven to be frauds, it's still an incredible moment in history and an exciting moment and spooky, still spooky. Ryan says, staying in the Borden house is still on your bucket list. It's great that it's a bed and breakfast. I mean, it's such a cool house. I would love to do that too. There's 3 bedrooms that I think they used for the B&B, but one of them is the murder room because the father was murdered in the living room downstairs. But one of the rooms that you can sleep in is one of the murder spots in the house, and it's just, oh, it's so creepy to be in there. It really is. But I mean, wouldn't you? I'm sure that people, I mean, awful sentiment, but maybe Halloweeny. I'm sure people have dropped dead all over the place, right? And I remember when I was living in Amsterdam, we had a very small apartment and particularly small shower. And the shower is always separate from like the toilet mostly in European apartments. They're completely different rooms. And both were very small. But in the shower, it was really, really small. I mean, I was pregnant then with Teddy, and I could barely turn to grab the soap. I mean, it was just impossible. And I never had any bad feelings about the apartment or the shower. But then one day, I bumped into the neighbor kid from upstairs, and we got talking, and he said something like, "Oh, do you ever get any weird feelings in the shower?" And I said, "No, of course not. Why?" Like, that's a really loaded question. No, why would I? He said, because the last tenant slipped and fell and hit his head and died in the shower. And I thought, oh, God, I wish I didn't know that, because then every time I went into the shower after that, I was super, super careful. But I thought, how does one do this? And I thought, oh, he must have been laying this way or that way. And oh, my God. But yes, I'm sure that there is a lot of this in every building, everywhere. But my point is, once you know, life becomes very spooky, doesn't it? It's something like maybe ignorance is bliss kind of a thing. April, good to see you. Happy Halloween. I think I'm too chicken for that too. I'm telling you, I've gotten to be such a chicken as time goes on. Karen says, you all need to come to Colorado and stay at the Stanley House, The Shining. That is definitely not happening. I mean, I will come to Colorado and I will shop at the Brass Armadillo and all of that fun and visit Rebecca. There's no way I'm going there. I would like to go if it's like tours and stuff. There's no way I'd stay there. That would just be, it would be a no sleep night, wouldn't it? But fun, I guess. Dave says, while staying at the Borden House B&B, would it be appropriate to use Axe body wash? I don't know if appropriate is the right word. It'd be inappropriate, but it would be very fitting. That is so funny. Great idea. Sharon, great to see you. Hello in Vancouver. We're starting off very silly today. Betty, good morning. Happy Halloween in Oklahoma. Great to see you. It's good to start off on a silly note, isn't it? Because it's going to be a bit of a tense episode. So I'm just going to start in on the commentary. We'll see how it goes. I was trying to assimilate all my info before the show began, and I'm hoping it's all in a good order and it makes good logical sense. But I'm going to be looking at that thread because I know that these are two stories that run through history that have a lot of Halloween um, feel, like that real spooky pull to them, but also stories that have had a lot of theories and thought and conversation over the years. So, Courtney, great to see you. So, if you have something to say or you have your own theory, absolutely say it here, right? Absolutely say it because that'll be more information for us. And we're always happy Halloween. We are always learning new things and unearthing new things. And that's the thing about these cold cases, right? Not so much the Fox sisters, but the Lizzie Borden case. These cold cases are so interesting because as time goes on, with more information, with more access to, it's not the days anymore of going looking at microfiche at the library. You can do these much more elaborate deep dives for information. You can research so much more easily. And with so many people doing that at the same time, sometimes things come together in an unexpected way, and something is unearthed or found or loaded online, and it's relevant to a case that is still a cold case, whether they're from 10 years ago or Victorian era. So it's interesting to talk about them because you never know what it's going to bring up in terms of jogging a memory or a thought. And of course, fresh eyes is always great with cold cases, right? That is just conversation and common sense. What has occurred to me might not have occurred to you, but you might say something, even though I've been reading up on the Lizzie Borden case for 10 or more years. I read everything that comes out on it because I think it's all interesting. I have all of the books, and most of it's repetitive, but once in a while somebody says something and it gets me thinking, God, why didn't I think of that part of it? So obvious. So it's fun to talk. Cat's Gallery. A colleague invited me to stay at her condo in Baja, California, sir, on the beach. When we got home, I was told both of her parents were murdered in the condo, and it remains unsolved. Oh, that gave me the super shivers. That is awful. That is. I'm not smiling because it's funny. I'm smiling because it's awful. Holy mackerel. That is unexpected conversations, right? Oh, you get the super heebie-jeebies with stuff like that. Mm. So let's look at the Fox sisters first because we left off on a great episode Friday night where we looked at the history of Halloween candy and Ouija boards and what else did we look at? Um, the tarot cards, the design on the tarot cards was so much fun. Cindy, happy Halloween. Great to see you. We had a really, and then we were looking at, remember at the end of the episode, this is the last slide we did at Friday night cocktail night, we were looking at sheet music because um, this was from the 1860s. This particular sheet music cover, but we were looking at songs about the Ouija board that came out, at least three songs in the 1920s, and just how interesting it is when something becomes so hot culturally that people start writing songs about it. That is really, you have arrived, right? You have arrived with your Ouija board toy game when people start writing sheet music about it. This was something else I had for Friday night that I didn't get to. I forgot it. It's from Punch, right? The British newspaper. Punch, or the London Charivari. I don't get that reference, but this is from 1860, and it was a comic cartoon that was sort of playing with the idea of spiritualism. And this is going to lead us into the conversation on the Fox sisters. The idea of rapping, like that sheet music cover that we were just looking at, the idea of things tipping and turning. Remember, I told you that terrible thing I got in with my teacher in grad school because I made a joke about the table writing like Valentines to people. This was such a huge part of the culture at the time, this quest to communicate with the dead. And it wasn't maybe as morbid or as grotesque as it sounds. It was just often out of desperation. This is the Civil War era. This was a time when life was really disposable in terms of young men, losses. It's a really sort of natural thing that people would want to communicate with the dead. But it came out as funny, like, for a London paper, this is maybe different than an American paper because they're not dealing with the Civil War. And it's maybe a bit more lighthearted. Maybe here, and I'm just speculating because, of course, I was not alive in 1860 as far as I know. And I'm speculating that it was a bit more, certainly spiked more quickly here, the whole spiritualist movement, but I think it was because of what was going on in our country, everything being so fragile, raw, and sad. Ryan says the 19th century spiritualist movement is so fascinating. It is so fascinating, and there's so many different facets to it too. um, but the part of it that is rough is the part where people are like charlatans. So this is a story that was debunked, and it's maybe a spoiler to say that now. There will always be people who believe that the Fox sisters had special power, special psychic powers. Um, I'm going to tell you the whole story from beginning to end, and then you can decide. So I got some information. These are the Fox sisters here. Let's back it up a little bit. And I found some good information online, and I usually do. So we can start with that. Karen Abbott wrote for Smithsonian. I go to Smithsonian and History a lot, like those two websites, because um, I just feel like it's more sort of solid information rather than opinion. And I think that's important with having a um, not very biased conversation about this stuff. So Karen Abbott wrote of the Fox sisters, their seances with the departed. And this is a very big statement. Launched a mass religious movement, and then one of them confessed that it was a common delusion. So that's how this article starts. The Fox sisters, and let me bring the picture back up from left to right, are Leah, Kate, and Maggie. I think I'm pulling this information from a website called Radical Spirits. One of the greatest religious movements of the 19th century began in the bedroom of two young girls living in a farmhouse in Hydesville, New York. On a late March day in 1848, Maggie Fox, 14 years old, and Kate, her 11-year-old sister, waylaid a neighbor eager to share an odd and fascinating phenomenon. Every night around bedtime, they said, they heard a series of raps on the walls and furniture, raps that seemed to manifest with a peculiar otherworldly intelligence. The neighbor, skeptical, came to see for herself, joining the girls in the small chamber they shared with their parents. While Maggie and Kate huddled together on their bed, their mother, Margaret, began the demonstration. And I'm going to come back to you here. She said, "Now count to 5." And the room started to shake with the sound of very heavy thuds. "Count to 15, she demanded, and the mysterious presence obeyed. Next, she asked it to tell the neighbor's age, and 36 distinct raps sounded. "If you are an injured spirit," she continued, "manifest it by 3 raps." And it did. Margaret Fox did not seem to consider the date, March 31st, which was April Fool's Eve, and the possibility that her daughters were frightened not by an unseen presence, but by the unexpected success of their prank. The Fox family deserted the house and sent Maggie, and so they're taking this very seriously. Not a prank at this point, right? This is like the jumping off point. The Fox family deserted the house and sent Maggie and Kate to live with their older sister, Leah Foxfish, in Rochester, New York. The story might have died there if it were not for the fact that Rochester was a hotbed for reform and religious activity. The same vicinity, the Finger Lakes region of New York State, gave birth to both Mormonism, Millerism, well, of course, not gave birth to Mormonism, but like the Mormonism in this part of the country. Mormonism and Millerism, Seventh-day Adventism. Community leaders Isaac and Amy Post were intrigued by the Fox sisters' story. So they're arriving in this new place, and already the story is spreading like wildfire because it happens to be the right environment for it. This town is already really knee-deep in revivals and new religious thought. So this is just a question of right place, right time at this moment. The Foxers, and by the subsequent rumor that the spirit was like that. Okay, so the idea between the rapping with this first story was that the person who was rapping and injured, and it sounds like they might have made the story up, was the body of a peddler who had been murdered and was in the house. Now that's foreshadowing. He'd been murdered 5 years before at the farmhouse that they had just abandoned as a family because of the rapping and the belief that it was haunted. A group of Rochester residents examined the cellar of the Fox's home, uncovering strands of hair and what appeared to be bone fragments. So, this supported the idea of the peddler being murdered, buried in the house, and trying to communicate with the girls on, April Fool's Day. The Posts invited the girls to a gathering at their house, anxious to see if they could communicate with the spirits in another location. So whether their powers were location specific or whether they had universal powers that could travel with them. I suppose I went with as much unbelief as Thomas felt when he was introduced to Jesus after he had ascended, Isaac Post wrote. So the Posts are going to be the advocates of the Fox sisters. They are jumping on the bandwagon in a huge way. So he was convinced. He was further convinced when Leah Fox, now that's the older sister who they went to, also proved to be a medium, communicating with the Post's recently deceased daughter. So isn't this how the story begins sometime? These people, the Posts, who really pick up the Fox sisters in Rochester, have a recently deceased daughter, and they're using Leah as the medium to talk with their daughter. So already they are going to be on board, aren't they? The Posts rented the largest hall in Rochester, and 400 people came to hear the mysterious noises. Afterward, Amy Post accompanied the sisters to a private chamber where they disrobed and were examined by a committee of skeptics who found no evidence of a hoax. So let's pause there and look at some of these slides. Let's look a little bit more at this story. There's a lot of twists and turns in this story, right? It's not just completely, this is the design that is in Robyn Candy Hooking. If you like the story, if you'd like to hook the Fox sisters, this is just suggestions for colors, but of course you could make it way more mysterious in nighttime if you wanted to. This is Kate, Maggie, and Leah Fox. And this is their house in Hydesville, New York. And this article appeared, the article that I'm pulling from, in the Hudson Valley Halloween magazine. So good sort of Halloween content. This is a postcard. Spiritualism originated, and then the date that they gave of the sisters, later called prank. Nancy, great to see you. Susie, great to see you. Thank you, Ryan. I'm really happy with that. I don't usually like doing stuff with people, but I really liked the sameness of the three sisters there. Now, just for some backstory, just like to put this into context, and again, not to be sacrilegious at all, because you know that I love religion myself, but the idea of people being able to communicate with spirits was not new at this point, right? In this Victorian period, when spiritualism really takes off, even people who were quite Christian could name. The more Christian you were, the more people you could name in the Bible who had these sort of psychic powers. The idea was not something that was new. So besides all of these hundreds of references in the Bible about angels administering to men and average men without special abilities being able to hear them and see them, that kind of thing, the ideas and practices of Franz Anton Mesmer, who was an 18th century healer, also spread to the United States in the 1840s. Mesmer proposed that everything in the universe, including the human body, was governed by magnetic fluid that could be imbalanced, and in being imbalanced, that would be the cause of your illness. So it would fall, right? And this is the backbone of mesmerism, right? Mesmerism. The idea that because we're made up so much of water, that if you can get the balances right, like I'm going to say it, cocktail, you could fix different ailments. And by waving his hands over a person's body, induced a mesmerized, using his name now as a verb, hypnotic state that allowed him to manipulate the magnetic force and restore health. So this is a very popular thought at this moment too, and a very new thought. At the same time also is Emanuel Swedenborg, an 18th century Swedish philosopher and mystic. His set of beliefs in church. There is a Swedenborg church on Route 6A on Cape Cod. I pass it all the time in Barnstable, I think. Might be Yarmouth. Swedenborg described an afterlife consisting of three heavens, three hells, and an interim destination, like a waiting room, a world of spirits, where everyone went to immediately upon dying, and which was more or less the same as your experience on earth. So this is very specific. And I'm just making the point that all of these beliefs were happening at the same time. So people are really overstimulated and getting a lot of information about all of these very different thoughts, but that all fall under the same sort of huge umbrella of spiritualism. So things are coming at you quite quickly in the 1850s and 1860s. Sharon says, I was wondering if there are any living direct descendants that have stories carried down over the years. Interesting. I don't know the answer to that. That's probably a pretty easy internet search to find that out. Certainly the Historical Society in Hydesville, that is a stop that I want to make because I'd love to follow up on this a little bit more. They do have a great sort of diorama of the Fox sisters' property with the house and in the middle of quite a bit of land. So that is like the central nervous system when it comes to the story of the Fox sisters. So certainly they would know with an email if it wasn't readily available, but they also have a huge website that talks obviously a lot about the Fox sisters because this is like the claim to fame here. So yeah, let me leave that for the moment, that kind of backstory, because as you can imagine, talking about spiritualism during the Victorian period, that's many, many books there. So I'm just doing nutshell talking now. But if it's something that you're interested in, you will find no lack of books on the subject, and they will all be really interesting. Lori, great to see you. Happy Halloween. Having a Halloween episode. So this is what happens next, right? So it could have stayed in Hydesville. It could have been left as a prank for April Fool's Day, but the parents got the family out of the house, and the two sisters went to live with the third sister, who was already working as a medium and locally quite successful. So the stage is set literally for a lot more success, a lot more promotion. And when you think about it, these are very young girls. This story is not dissimilar to the Salem witch trials, the original accusers, girls of about the same age, early teens kind of thing, going into like middle teens. Imagine how exciting it would be for these girls to be getting this kind of attention. At this time in history, at the Victorian period, girls are just like, components to men's lives, they're accessories. This would have been incredible to be getting this kind of attention at that age. That must have felt great, right? Maggie, Kate, and Leah Fox embarked on a professional tour to spread the word of the spirits, booking a suite, fittingly, at the Barnum Hotel on the corner of Broadway and Maiden Lane, an establishment owned by the cousin of Barnum. Right? Coincidence? An editorial in the Scientific American scoffed at their arrival, calling the girls the spiritual knockers of Rochester. They conducted their sessions in the hotel's parlor, inviting as many as 30 attendees to gather around a large table at the hours of 10 a.m. to 5 p.m. and then again at 8 p.m. Admission was $1. There were a lot of famous visitors who came to see the Fox sisters, like Horace Greeley, the iconoclastic and influential editor of the New York Tribune, James Fenimore Cooper, editor and poet, William Cullen Bryant, an abolitionist and writer, William Lloyd Garrison, who witnessed a session in which the spirits rapped in time to a popular song and spelled out the message, "Spiritualism will work miracles in the cause of reform." Right? So, I mean, these are messages that are crossing over into the political arena. That in itself should be quite suspicious in my mind, but different time, right? Different time. Leah stayed. Now, this is what happens to the girls. They achieve fame, right? They are doing stuff on stage. They are traveling. They are celebrities, right? And people are crediting the sisters with being the founders in the United States of spiritualism, right? There's all kinds of different church movements and religious movements, but they are considered the founders of the spiritualist movement. This is really big, and it has gone really far at this point. So can you imagine if you're one of the sisters and you know that this is a prank? Can you imagine how hard it would be with this kind of momentum and attention to pull the plug on that, right? It would be like a super shaming thing. It would be a reversal of fortune in a huge way. knockers has a different meaning today. It does. I know. Lots of knockers around the tables here. Um, Funny. So, they all had kind of different destinies, at least during this time that they were going with the flow and promoting their brand of spiritualism. So Leah stays in New York and she entertains callers in a seance room, while Kate and Maggie take the show on the road to lots of other cities, including Cleveland, Cincinnati, Columbus, St. Louis, Washington, D.C., and Philadelphia. Famous explorer of the time, Elijah Kent Kane, fell in love with Maggie. And he believed her to be a fraud. And he tried to debunk her, the show, and everything that she was saying and doing, but he couldn't. And he ended up falling in love with her and marrying her. He was a strict Presbyterian. And in marrying him, she completely abandoned spiritualism. He was quite a bit older than her, and he died almost immediately after they were married. She went to a deep stage of mourning, had changed religions in his honor and as a tribute to his memory, because he died that fast. And she became a very heavy drinker. So this is where her life is at pretty quickly. Kate married a devout spiritualist, right? On the contrary, and continued to develop her medium powers, translating spirit messages in astonishing and unprecedented ways, communicating two messages simultaneously, writing one while speaking the other, transcribing messages in reverse script, utilizing blank cards upon which words seem to spontaneously appear. During sessions with a wealthy banker called James Livermore, she summoned both the man's deceased wife and the ghost of Benjamin Franklin, who announced his identity by writing his name on a card. Her business boomed during and after the Civil War as increasing number of bereaved found solace in spiritualism. These new practitioners, seduced by the flamboyance of the Gilded Age, expected miracles. So the results of these, seances or wrappings or just appointments had to become more and more spectacular as time went on, because it was like a show. And especially with the very, very top wealthy class, the Gilded Age people, that top tier of society people wanted something more than everyone else was getting. So, I mean, the results had to be phenomenally extravagant to keep these people interested and paying, right? So, like Kate's summoning of full-fledged apparitions. So, she's producing ghosts at every seance at this point. It was wearying both to the movement and to Kate herself, and she also began to drink heavily. In October of 1888, the New York World, this is the turning point, published an interview with Maggie Fox. So she's the one who married the Presbyterian explorer who died immediately. And they knew that in the interview, the idea was she was going to confess that the whole thing was a fraud. And the build up to the confession was a huge part of the story. And there was a lot of media covering what would be the confession, but they were covering it up to it. So it was a huge spoiler alert, knowing what she was about to say, and all of these newspapers vying for exclusives to cover it before she said it. So the anticipation for her appearance, and it was going to happen at the New York Academy of Music. She was going to publicly denounce spiritualism, and she was paid in 1888 $1,500 to do that, which would have been an extraordinary amount of money. Her main motivation, however, was her rage at her sister Leah and other spiritualists who had publicly sort of made fun of her for her drinking problem, and suggested that because of her drinking, she was not fit to have her two children. So hitting below the belt a bit, and to get back at her sisters and other spiritualists for saying this very particular thing about her private life, she decides to debunk all of spiritualism and what the sisters had done up till then. So, so she said, my sister Katie and myself were very young children when this horrible deception began. At night when we went to bed, we used to tie an apple on a string and move the string up and down, causing the apple to bump on the floor. Or we would drop the apple on the floor, making a strange noise every time it would rebound. The sisters graduated from apple dropping. This is outside of quote. They graduated from apple dropping to manipulating, and this is so gross to me, but you do hear this all the time, manipulating their knuckles and joints and toes to make rapping noises. I mean, talk about giving yourself arthritis, right, for this. A great many people, when they hear the rapping, imagine at once that the spirits are touching them, she explained. It was a very common delusion. Some very wealthy people came to see me some years ago when I lived at 42nd Street, and I did some rappings for them. I made the spirit rap on the chair, and one of the ladies cried out, "I feel the spirit tapping me on the shoulder." Of course, it was pure imagination. And she actually, when she does this denouncement in New York, she offers a demonstration. And she removes her shoe, places her right foot up on a wooden stool. The room falls completely still and silent. And they are rewarded with hearing all these little rapping noises that she's doing with her bones. And then she said, there stood a black, oh no, this was the newspaper, the New York Herald. There stood a black-robed, sharp-faced widow, this is Maggie, working her big toe, this is such a weird story, isn't it? And solemnly declaring that it was the way she created the excitement that had driven so many persons to suicide or insanity. One moment it was ludicrous, the next it was weird. Maggie insisted that her sister Leah knew that the rappings were fake all along and greedily exploited her younger sisters. Before exiting the stage, she thanked God that she was able to expose spiritualism. Now, again, the story could end there, but it doesn't, because for whatever reason, and your guess is as good as mine, Maggie recanted her confession 1 year later, insisting that her spirit guides told her to recant. But the spiritualist community at this point hates her, and they do not accept the apology. They do not take her back. They completely ignore her, shut her out. She never reconciles with her sisters. Leah dies in 1890, so like that year. Kate dies 2 years later, also on a drinking spree, because remember, she had started drinking too. And Maggie passes away 8 months after Kate, in March of 1893. So not happy endings for any of the three sisters. And the story could end there. But wait, there's more. So in 1904, this is 9 years after all three sisters have passed away, school children playing in the sisters' childhood home in Hydesville, so let's come back there, right here, discover the majority of a skeleton between the earth and the crumbling cedar walls. A doctor was consulted who estimated the bones were about 50 years old, giving credence to the sisters' tale of spiritual messages from a murdered peddler. Bump, bump, bump. I mean, that even gave me the shivers, and I knew what was coming there. It's interesting, isn't it? Let me see what else we have here on the Fox sisters before we move on to Lizzie. This is a photo of Leah and Maggie, right? This is the basis for the drawing that I did. They look so young, don't they? I mean, they look so young and beautiful and naive, guileless. I mean, they're just such beautiful women. So that's the drawing. And I had to add the third sister, of course, because she's not in the photos with them. Okay, so guess what? We're going to make a transition. Sharon says, it's funny. There is a tarot card reader, an astrologist, and a medium, all within 10 blocks of my house. You are in the central nervous system, right, for all of this thought. Now, I wanted to read this letter from Linda, and she wrote, I just discovered, okay, wait a minute, let me come through here. She's talking about discovering coffee time and cocktail time and all that. She said, tonight you mentioned the Fox Sisters of Hydesville, New York. And I'm not able to watch on Monday, but she says, I used to work the evening shift at the hospital in Newark. Hydesville is part of Newark. I always drove home on the Hydesville Road. It's a rural area with not many houses or outside lights. And I'm not going to lie, but on dark, rainy nights at midnight, it was kind of spooky driving by that old Fox house, which was actually a replica of the original. Oh, I didn't know that. Interesting. It was quite abandoned at that time, and in the 80s, they tore it down and eventually built a structure over the old foundation. Interesting. It's now a tiny park you can visit and peek in at the foundation, as the building is always locked. Isn't that great information? I mean, shivers. I just love, my hands are shaking a little bit. I just love it. I just love these kinds of stories. It just gets you going, gets you thinking in other ways. You know, it's exciting. It's exciting. So, all right, let's move on to Lizzie. Lizzie is one of my favorite subjects, and we all have different opinions about her. We all know that the Elizabeth Montgomery movie, right, Bewitched, right? She played Lizzie in a movie in the 70s, which is very good. We all know the rhyme about the gave her mother 40 whacks or 50 whacks, right? The story of this murder, I think, is so another Victorian murder. We're talking about the 1890s. Um, Crystal said of the Fox sisters, did no one ever look under the table at their feet during the wrappings? They would, well, as a skeptic, yes, but I'm thinking like I'm picturing what the photographs look like of people doing these wrappings, and they always have these Victorian tablecloths, which would probably hide a lot. I know from other stories, and I don't know if it's the same with the Fox sisters, but my friend who I mentioned on Friday, Rory Raven, he's done a lot of writing on this and talking on this, and I've listened to him talk quite a bit about this. There are other things besides cracking your bones and knuckles and stuff that you could do. There were things that you could do with your knee or attaching stuff that you could hit the underside of the table. So it was almost like um, psychics who meant to deceive people and keep their jobs going. They were moving faster. It's almost like spammers or people on the internet who are always trying to figure out ways to like hack your stuff. They're always working a little bit ahead of you, and that's the thing. They seem to, the history of it says that they seem to keep figuring out new ways to be able, means to an end, to make the sounds, but they weren't always the same. Of course, the people who are participating in the seance would be absolutely required to shut their eyes and have their hands busy. So you wouldn't be checking stuff like that if you were participating. Also, just from what I've read, like fiction and nonfiction, it seems like there's always and I don't mean to be completely skeptical because some of you might believe in like part of this story, but it seems like there is always an accomplice who is in the room. And you know, it's often like a child or the brother or the spouse or something like that. And I guess from other stories, not the Fox sisters, that would be the person who would be really careful to be sure that there was no sort of investigation happening while the event was happening, while everyone had their eyes closed. So I think it was pretty well monitored, just the same way that any, again, I'm sorry to sound skeptical, but I mean, they denounced themselves, didn't they? But I think like any performance, there's like, you got to have all these checks and balances in place because it can go wrong. But remember that the Fox sisters were not accused of being a hoax until the confession. So even the husband who was determined to prove that they were a hoax, he could not prove it. So in that way, they managed to evade all of that suspicion, which is like it's part of the mystery, isn't it? So the one sister, Maggie, who turns on them, she is telling a story from when they were children, but it doesn't sound like she went into great detail of the evolution of the deceit and how they kept trying different. I mean, she showed the thing with the foot and the toe, but I'm guessing that they over time had to evolve other tricks. And it sounds like the other sister, Kate, did. Like she was doing the thing where she was drawing with both hands at the same time and writing one message while she was drawing or writing a second message. Benjamin Franklin and dead wife. I mean, that would take a lot of practice. But I suppose if this is your profession, you must keep up with it and become better at it. But it's a huge, big subject. It's a vast, big subject, and it is super interesting. And for somebody like me who was in the theater for so long, it's super interesting to think about how much work would have to go into these kinds of events and these kinds of deceptions, because these are young girls tricking adults. So it would take a lot of savvy and thought and planning to pull this off, and a lot of confidence. So it's all interesting. Ryan says, I agree with Sharon. The power of belief is great and could easily fool anyone. Oh, I think I missed that. It's funny. I believe it. Okay, I might have missed one higher up. It's funny. There's a tarot card reader. Just checking in. Oh, I think that they wanted to believe so that, yeah, absolutely. It's the same thing as like when you're given a placebo and you don't know it by the doctor, right? There's so many instances with the human body, brain included, that you can override whatever the problem is, whether it's emotional or physical, because you want to, and that you believe in that moment that you have the tools to. And unless you think otherwise or second guess yourself, you could, in theory, go along with a lot of things like placebo medicine and feel better because it got you past where you needed to be, and now you're in the better place. And sometimes it's not about the means to the end, is it? Sometimes it's just about the product of the end. And the product is good. So you don't second guess or question what the journey was. I think a lot of this has to do with that. But I am more of a skeptic, I have to say. So transitioning to Lizzie. Oh, Wendy, good to see you. Oh, thank you. I had one, this is my second Halloween vest. I had one on last week. I thought this one was super cute with the different witches and ah, they're so cute. I get them on eBay. They're like dead cheap, particularly when it's not Halloween. So Lizzie is a lot different, because Lizzie was accused of murdering her stepmother and father. And I mean, this is quite serious. The thing that got me into this, couple of things. The story and the murder takes place in Fall River, which is one of my favorite places. It's this beautiful industrial town right over the Massachusetts line from Rhode Island. So it was always close to where I lived when I lived, in the U.S. and grew up in Rhode Island. It was something that you heard people talking about still because it was still a local kind of a crime, and it was interesting and exciting because it was this very pretty looking gentle spinster girl who's accused of this horrific bloody and violent over the top axe murder, and it was such an oxymoron, I think, for people to consider that somebody like this could be guilty, and a woman at that, in the Victorian period in the 1890s, completely killing the sort of stereotype of what a woman is. So, and that's one of the reasons. And the other reason was my dad, who passed away years ago, always kept like a scrapbook of his thoughts and theories and newspaper articles that he clipped out on the Lizzie Borden case. He was always interested in solving it from like a Sherlock Holmes. He loved Sherlock Holmes, a Sherlock Holmes point of view. And we talked about it a lot at the table because it was one of his great passions, one of his great interests. So I look through his album a lot and I read the things that he clipped out and glued in there. And in our family, I think it's been a story that we have enjoyed talking about and kicking around for quite a lot of years. So I want to start, I'm probably going to run over today. I've got a lot of resources for you that are going to be great, but I want to start with the basics. So let's first talk about the key people in this crime. I'll read first an article that I found that's a good go-to if you are interested in more of this. It's from bostonmagazine.com and it's called Throwback Thursday: The Discovery of the Slain Borden Parents. And this is written by Madeline Billis from August 4th, 2016. And this is a short conversation on the crime scene when the bodies are discovered. And again, just by way of refreshment, this is what we're talking about here. I have not finished my Lizzie Borden yet. A couple people have bought this in the last few months, and I wonder if anybody's finished it because I have not. So Madeline says, and this just sets the scene. On one oppressively hot day, 124 years ago, of course, this article is dated too, police met a gruesome scene at 92 2nd Street in Fall River. August 4th marks the day Andrew and Abby Borden were found hacked to pieces. Both of their, and this is not for the weak of heart, so if you are squeamish, I'm not going to show horrible photos or talk in detail about the injuries, but if you are squeamish, this conversation might be a bit much for you. Both of their heads were brutally bludgeoned. Abby was discovered upstairs, and Andrew was downstairs on the sofa. Who would commit such a ghastly crime? Speculation pointed to Elizabeth Lizzie Andrew Borden, daughter of Andrew and stepmother Abby Borden. After finding no concrete evidence pointing to her guilt, police arrested the 32-year-old woman a week later. So they arrest Lizzie. She was an unmarried woman, further adding to the media sensation of her trial, charged with a double homicide. She was one of two people who were at home when the bodies were found. The other was the Irish maid Bridget Sullivan. Borden claimed that she had been in the barn at the back of the house. Somehow she didn't hear the brutal murders taking place while she was while she was in the barn in the back searching for fishing sinkers, right? She liked to fish. Unfortunately, and I'm remembering this from other supporting stuff at the time, the police looked in the barn and they found it was dusty as anything, like there hadn't been a person in there forever, and there were no footsteps in the whole barn. So where she said she was, like climbing up to the loft to look for these sinkers, there were no footsteps in the dust. So that was a problem. Investigators also thought that it was odd that Borden burned one of her dresses in the days before her arrest. This was another thing. They don't go into everything on this article, but when a policeman came to the house to talk to her, because unfortunately or fortunately, the day of the murders was the day of the policeman's party in Fall River. So almost every policeman was at this outdoor picnic, and only one policeman came to the call when Lizzie discovered, I don't think that she did it incidentally, discovered the body, not alone anyway, discovered the bodies. One policeman came because everyone else was at the picnic. So that's going to be a huge problem with the detection part of the crime, because even though this was a long time ago, people in the 1890s weren't stupid. It was just there were no policemen there, and it gave the family a lot of extra time to like do some damage control. So and they were also a very upper class family, so it was not, it was a very touchy thing for the police to come into an upper class household and be asking questions of family members who were completely not their class. This would be also tricky, asking direct questions. So a policeman, policemen are visiting on and off in the days that follow before the week where she is taken in and arrested. So at one of these visits, there's a policeman in the house asking questions, and he sees Lizzie in the distance, a few rooms away, burning a dress in the stove. And she claims that she's burning it because she got paint on it, right? She also paints as a hobbyist. This is another really problematic twist, uh, because it's not typical to burn your clothes if they're dirty. It's more typical to donate them or mend them, particularly in their house. Although they were super wealthy, the dad Andrew, was murdered on the couch. Um, he did not spend money on the family. He was super wealthy, but they didn't even have hot water inside the house. The girls were always arguing and fighting about having better clothes, being able to shop at better places so they could present themselves in society, right? These are spinsters, and they are living like animals with like no hot water, no modern conveniences, while the family is super wealthy. The father just does not allow for those kind of expenses. So it creates a lot of sort of acrimony at home between family members. Happy Halloween, Heather. Good to see you. So that will be a big problem too. The fact, and here's another thing that's a huge problem. No physical evidence connected Lizzie with the murder. The fact that no blood was found on her or on any of her belongings was a problem in prosecuting her. Um, Many people believe that if she was the person that was holding the axe for at least one of the murders, that she took off her clothing and did the murders in the nude. That is one of the strong theories that has lasted for more than 100 years. Um, so the fact that they couldn't get evidence on her was a really big problem. Of course, the dress was burnt. Once it was burnt, there was nothing they could do about that either. Forensics was at a very early and sort of primitive stage at this point too. But again, people were not stupid. They could have prosecuted her in a way more aggressive way if there was proof that they could have used at the trial. The problem was there was no proof. So she was brought to trial and she was acquitted. And because of the lack of evidence, Lizzie and her sister Emma inherited a large fortune, a $7 million fortune, upon their father's death and stepmother. And they bought another home in Fall River, which was called Maplecroft, where they remained until her sister Emma's death. They did have a falling out in later years. Lizzie and her sister stopped talking to each other. And it was one of Lizzie's great sort of disappointments in her life that she didn't mend things with her sister before her sister died. They were absolutely not on speaking terms, like at the end of their lives. At one point, Maplecroft was also a bed and breakfast. I'm not sure if it still is, but certainly the murder house is, because I've gone there recently. I go there fairly often. And you know, I'm gonna continue with the commentary for a few minutes, but just so you know, if this is a story that's interesting to you and you come to Fall River specifically to see it, there's a lot to do in that area to begin with. That's some of one town over, 15 minutes away. Some of the best antiquing you'll find in the whole world is like right there. But the house is wonderful. It is a bed and breakfast. But you want to be careful when you do the tours because they do two kinds of tours there. One of them are the tours where they do what I'm doing now, like the historical background. People want to know about the crime. People want to know about that day. They want to hear the whole story in detail and see if they can think of some angles that they haven't thought of yet. The other kind of tour is the ghost tour, and I took that accidentally once, and I'm glad I did because I had already taken the other tour many times. But the ghost tour specifically focuses on the idea that there are ghosts in the house and talking about where they have manifested. So that is very, very different, and it's not a general knowledge information tour. It's very slanted. So if you do visit, make sure that you know what kind of tour you're signing up for because it for me wasn't obvious. Last time I went, I accidentally took the ghost tour. Another thing, if you go to the house and you take the general tour, they do ask you if you want to see the autopsy photos. And like an idiot, I was like the first one to raise my hand and say yes. And they took these black and white close up photos out. They had shaved the heads of Andrew Borden and the stepmother. And these are the most graphic things I've ever seen. I cannot handle violence, even like on the TV. And I almost passed out. Like I was holding the edge of the I mean, it was so much. So I cannot advise that you look at those because it was a lot. You know, I was much younger then too, so I, could handle things a bit better than I do now. But, whew, I can still picture. I mean, there's like burnt on my mind. It's not for everybody. So let me come back to some pictures. I found some pictures and screenshots that I think are interesting for us to look at. And I am running over, but I am going to close this episode out. So let's see. This is the Borden house in the background, famous picture of Lizzie. Lots of pictures of Lizzie out there. Um, oh gosh, I missed. Was there someone plucked and reported? Was there someone? Oh, did I miss some action? I might have missed something in the thread. Someone naughty's out there. This is the room where the mother was murdered, and this is the room where you can stay for the bed and breakfast. She was found on the left-hand side of the bed, not the side we're looking at, but between the wall and the bed, just laying there. Right, so this is her laying here. This is not a graphic photo, but this is the actual scene of the crime. So that is the mother deceased, the stepmother deceased on the floor. And in a distance, now close your eyes if you're not up for this, but in the distance, this is the father. So he is on the couch and he has been struck in the head, in the face, actually, not the head, in the face. And he is keeled over. So that one is even more brutal. And, you can speculate on why it could be more brutal because the person who killed him seems to have certainly come around the corner where that door is right next to him and surprised him that way because he was taking a nap on the couch. That's one of the things that I'm working on in this, that I kind of aborted the mission because with this piece, I have Lizzie with the axe behind her back here. This is the couch, and this is all confusing, but I was determined to use these wool strips that Jocelyn, my daughter, and I had dyed with food coloring sprinkles. So it's not really working. I have a blue sleeve on Lizzie's dress. I got to get rid of that and make a pink sleeve because that's not very cohesive. But then I have like a yellow speckled sofa, and I don't think that's working either. But you can see here I have just the father's feet and legs, which I haven't done yet, and the body is hidden behind her body because it's just, I think, a bit too much, The bed in the guest room is different from the original photo. It is. I noticed that too. It's a completely different, I mean, it's still a Gothic Victorian style bed, but it is different than the original. It hasn't always been a bed and breakfast, as you can imagine. And it was for sale last year. I don't know if it's still for sale or if it's sold, but last year, in January of last year, the house went up for sale, I think, for $1 million. Maybe it was more than that. But I remember thinking it wasn't as much as I would think. You would also look at the autopsy photos. When you're standing there, it's very tempting. It's very tempting. So this is a photo collage of Lizzie on the left. I believe that this is Lizzie on the right as well. The house on the bottom left, the mother down, and the father down on the couch. And here's the other person who was in the house at the time of the murder. This is Bridget. She was the Irish maid, very strong Irish accent, very close friend to the family. She's going to come into the story again in a minute. And here is another sort of composite. Lizzie on the left, Emma, the sister, in the middle, and Bridget on the right. Um, Again, Lizzie and Emma are spinsters, and they are not happy with the money situation. There is a lot of money in the family, and they are living like paupers. And they are both feeling like their lack of funds and keeping up with the Joneses is preventing them from making viable matches and finding men and moving on with their lives. And it's a very good point, I think. This is Bridget, a little bit later in life. She's a little bit older here. She was always suspected because the prosecuting attorney, who's pictured here, Hosea Knowlton, he always felt and he always said that he thought Bridget was not telling everything that she knew. Very frustrating, right? Very frustrating. Now, I found this great page, just something for later. I'm not finished, but it's called Warps and Wefts. And they have a YouTube channel, they have a Facebook page. It's over 100 videos about Lizzie Borden with different theories, right? Short videos, all about Lizzie. So warps and wefts, hundreds of videos for you sleuths who want to look more at the case and think more about the case. That's going to be a great resource for you. I'm going to come to this man in just a minute. So let me just hit this one more time. So this is, I'm going to put this out there because I've thought about this case a lot too, and I've read a lot about this case. Let's just cover some of the facts, right? Just to recap some of the facts, things that we know. Incidentally, there is another great blog, if you're interested in this conversation, put out by, I think her name is Kimberly Fause, F-A-U-S-E, and the site is called KS Fause, Fause.wordpress, and it is theory. It's an article where her idea is that Lizzie, Emma, and Bridget did this together, right? Like the three women were united. The feeling about the women in the house was not a positive one in terms of Andrew Borden. Now, their natural mother had died, and he had remarried the stepmother, so this is not the natural mother. Bridget tried to quit a few times, but kept being raised, and so she stayed with the family, but she seemed to not be happy there. And then we've got the two spinster daughters who are definitely not happy there. Emma is already not on speaking terms with her dad and is taking all her meals upstairs. One of the interesting things about the house is that inside the bedrooms, at least of the women, there are lots of locks inside the bedroom. So, like not one or two, like a bunch of locks. So that speaks of all kinds of mistrust, doesn't it? I don't want to put too fine a point on it because some people have said, oh, was there some kind of an abuse problem happening in the house that the daughters would have to shut their doors and have this many locks? All subjective, right? All kinds of theories have been put out there. But Kimberly's theory is that Emma, Lizzie, and Bridget did this together, right? And that kind of makes sense too because Lizzie changed her alibi multiple times. And Bridget's alibi was that at the time of them, neither of them were in the house when this unknown person came in with an axe and just killed two people. Lizzie was in the shed looking for the fishing lures. That shifts a little bit later. But Bridget is outside in the backyard also throwing up because she's eaten 5-day-old mutton. It's August. It's super hot. And she's very, very sick, right? She's got like food poisoning. Cinderella goes macabre. Absolutely. And Kat's Gallery adds, also the location of the Borden house was not where the wealthy lived. That's a great point. That's absolutely true. So, and you know, her dad was a mill owner. So he was a real pain in the butt as well because he was super wealthy and he's one of those bosses that I think a lot of us can identify with who's always popping around the mills, just looking over people's shoulders, driving people nuts. He was not a well-liked person by his family or by the community, to say the least. So more facts. Abby, the stepmother, was struck 18 or 19 times in the back of the head. So it seemed to be that she was making the bed and she was cornered between the bed and the wall and hit in the back of the head. Or maybe she didn't know somebody had snuck up behind her. Andrew was hit 10 times just in his face. And when Lizzie and Borden come back inside, Lizzie puts the alarm up. Oh my God, Bridget, because at this point, Bridget has come in from being sick and is laying down upstairs in the servants' quarters. And Lizzie comes in, discovers the bodies. Oh my God, the parents have been killed, something like that, and wakes up Bridget, who comes downstairs. And then they call for the police. But of course, one person shows up because it's the annual police picnic day. Lizzie's alibi changes quite a few times. Bridget is outside that she's throwing up after eating the 5-day-old mutton. Another fact, Andrew's worth millions of dollars. That's a big part of it. The prosecuting attorney never feels good about the case because he knows that the maid is lying. This is all difficult stuff to reconcile with. Another, like, I'm just going to do this in a nutshell, but my feeling has always been there's a big part of the story that is not talked about often. And to me, it's the most interesting part of the story. Two things. Emma, this Lizzie's sister, who never traveled anywhere, never liked to be away from home, happened to be away on an overnight weekend thing to friends who she was not in the habit of visiting on the day of the murders. So she was not at home during the day of the murders, and that is well established. But it is very odd that she wasn't at home because it was not typical. Another thing that was even less typical was that another family member, estranged family member, the brother of the deceased mother, who was a lawyer, came to the house the night before the murders, which he never did, and stayed over. And it is believed that he left in the morning right before the murders were committed. Like, he did business. It was about changing the will. That's why he was there. But he left. It is believed he left right before the murders happened and like was going back home. He lived, I feel like, in Boston, something like that, different area. So that's very strange. And why have people not talked about that part of it more? He was the actual mother's brother, right? He would have been very concerned with money issues too. He was a lawyer. He was there to talk about changing the will. I believe all this is true. I'm going a lot on memory, right? I used to cover this when I was a tour guide. But this is very strange. And even stranger still, you know how they say in mystery books, like, if you have too good of an alibi, that's a bit suspicious. His alibi was that he was definitely gone from the house by the hour that the murders took place because he was on a bus sitting with not one, but two Catholic priests. Like, he had two different Catholic priests as an alibi on this bus, that he was not any, that he had already left the house when the murders happened, because it was that morning that the murders happened. This to me has always been very strange and not sitting well at all. So this is John Morse, right? This is the brother of the deceased mother, the actual mother of Lizzie and Emma. And I put these slides up that come from a great Lizzie Borden trial slideshow by Cornelius, I think it's Par, P-A-R. But you can find it at the website slideplayer.com/slide/ you might have to pause this or rewind it, 15005787. It's a full slideshow with slides like this that talk to you about the different suspects and the different moments. I'm only showing you a few of them. Oops, wait a minute. I didn't mean to do that. So that was John Morse, right? That was very strange. This is Lizzie's slide. It tells you just a recap of where she was, some of the things that she did that were suspicious, some of the problem with prosecuting her. This slide on the broken axe, right? The police found this hatchet with a broken handle, like the handle broke off of it in the basement, but it showed no signs of blood. Of course, forensics is not a thing yet. Forensics, as it existed, tested it, but they didn't find blood, or I can't remember if they found animal blood, but not, it was not definitive in any case. And they felt that in finding this, it should have been bloody. They should have found traces of blood, and they felt like they found this early enough in the investigation, even with that one police officer there. You can read the transcript to the case, right? That's available to you. That is published. You can read the whole court transcript that spans many days, going into these very specific conversations. This is Emma Borden, the sister who rarely leaves the house, very deteriorated relationship with both of her parents, always eating alone in her room with the doors locked. There's a lot of suspects here, right? Here's Andrew, the dad, a bit of a miser, not a well-loved person in the community. Yeah, holding a lot of money back from the sisters. Here's another slide with Bridget, just to recap her story, how it was an oppressively hot day. She'd been asked to clean the windows When her mother, the father went into town to make his rounds, the mother was doing some housework and she did not want to clean the windows. She had food poisoning and it was hideously hot and she just did not see why she had to clean the windows on that day. I wouldn't say that's a strong motive for killing two people with an axe, but she is considered one of the suspects, right? Particularly in retrospect. Now, here is the courtroom where this all happened. I just think this is a really evocative photo because imagine sitting here, you know, in the 1890s as a local person. You could come if you could fit in, if you could find a seat, you could be here, and you could be looking at the progress of the trial. I mean, what a moment in time, right? But again, this is well documented. This is something that you can read word for word if you're interested in. And I just wanted to show you closer up. This is the pattern that I have for Lizzie. So I have patterns out at Ribbon Candy Hooking for both of the subjects we covered today, the Fox Sisters and Lizzie Borden. This is the one I'm working on here. And you can see I was having a lot of trouble with forcing these like sprinkle food coloring wools in. It's just too busy. But I was also experimenting with doing Lizzie's face in profile using number 8s, which is very wide, trying to get, there's like a little kind of curl of pink in her cheek. I don't think this photo is bringing it out well because it's too bright, but she has a bit of a pink cheek. And I was trying to achieve some success with using primitives number 8 or higher to do this whole piece. And it's not a large piece. And then this is the part with the sofa that I was saying I was having a bit of a struggle, and I do need to rework the blue sleeve, and I think I am going to put a more traditional sofa. I was really determined to use this like blood red over dyed color that Joss and I did too, still using like chocolate sprinkles on the red. I was determined to use that, and because of that, it created a very busy background where I now need to rethink both the dress and the couch. I just have not had time. But both of those patterns are out there if you are interested in looking at them. I love talking about this story. I loved covering this when I was a tour guide on a bus and we would drive through Fall River. I would be able to tell this story. People seemed to really love it. And it's just interesting to, I always say I love to be wrong about stuff, right? And we've been talking about the guilt of Lizzie Borden for so long. And there are other suspects here. And that's what's so weird about this case is, yeah, the sister wasn't present as far as we know. I mean, we'd have to recheck those details, you know, with modern everything. But she apparently was not there, and that they were satisfied of that. But the presence of John Morse is very strange. The thing with Bridget being sick at that moment too. The idea that somebody just came into the house and killed two people with no motive doesn't really make any sense, does it? So the story always comes back to that nucleus of the family and only the two people that we know to be in that house, unless John Morse was in that house. How do you get around an alibi of two Catholic priests? I mean, it's a tricky story. It's tricky. It's got lots of twists and turns. There's lots to know. But I think it's an interesting story, and I love thinking about it, particularly on Halloween. We touched on Friday night about murders at Halloween and stuff. This is not Halloween. This is an August murder, but certainly this is one of the great unsolved mysteries that feels like Halloween because it is super grotesque. If you do research it, you will find that later in her life, too, she got into a lot of sort of trouble in the media. Everybody was on her side after the case. Like her neighbors thought she was somebody who always made cookies for people, was super gracious, super kind to everybody around her, and she was well liked. She bought Cat's Gallery. You're up on this one. She did buy poison, or she attempted to before the murders, and she was denied it at like the local store. Well, she asked for it from the doctor, and the doctor said no, and then she attempted to buy it, and it was still a no. So that was also something that worked against her, but it wasn't conclusive enough. It definitely seems like a crime of passion to an extent, but at the same time, this required some planning. I mean, even thinking about that police picnic, was that lucky, or was that part of the plan? Because the father routinely made his rounds, so that was all set. And then the mother would routinely do the housework, so that was kind of all set. Those were kind of static characters that you could expect their comings and goings. But the sister being away, and then the person having slept over the night before, the other family member, John Morse, I wonder how much depends on those two parts of the story. So I mean, there's so much there that's interesting. But later in her life, the tide of public opinion turned against Lizzie, mostly because she became very interested in the theater, and it was believed that she was having a relationship with another woman. And at this time, this was not something that people like to hear about, know about, suspect. So the tide of sentiment turned against her. And then there was an incident I remember reading about, like in a history book. She was caught for shoplifting more than once in Providence. And of course, she had tons of money, but these are all things that kind of turned people against her. So she became a real sort of recluse, hermit type character later in her life. Children were scared of her. She continued to bake cookies and try to be friendly around the neighborhood because they were living at Maplecroft already. But it was like people did not want to be close to her. She was really isolated. So if she was innocent, this is a very sad ending to her life, feuding with her sister and then really being very cut off from the rest of the world. So interesting story, a lot more to a lot of anger. That's a lot of hits with the axe, particularly with the father in the face. I mean, that takes so much nerve. So scary just thinking about the way that happened. And I'll tell you, I'm not much of a ghost person, but when you're standing in that room, particularly the room with the sofa and the dad, it gives me the chills just thinking about it. Um, just seeing the very couch, it's just picturing it is unbelievable. Picturing someone coming around that doorway with the axe while he's asleep and hitting him that many times, 18 times in the face. That's um, being 1 foot away from where that happened is scary, even, in an empty room. So imagine the mental anguish. Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Because whether she participated or not, I mean, this is a horrific event that becomes like public property. I mean, people, the day of the murder, it was described you couldn't get anywhere near the house. It was like a rock concert, like people just lining the street, trying to see what they could see while the one policeman goes about his work and the other policemen start to show up coming back from the picnic. It's not like you're going to call somebody and say, we've got a problem, can you come back? They're like nowhere near. They're in this like pastoral place having a picnic, like the annual picnic. They're not in town. So as people emerge, they're trying to the general public is standing outside the house, like waiting for information, waiting for clues, trying to glean what they can from people's expressions and conversations that are happening. It's a really big deal. It would have left a horrible mark on the family and a horrible mark on everybody involved, whether they participated or not. I mean, who knows? Maybe it was John Morse who did all of it himself, and then the legacy of the two sister spinsters having this sort of, the world always believed that Lizzie did this. It's a lot, but who knows? Who knows? There's probably a very good reason why it is believed that she did do it, right? Burning the dress. There's so much that went against her. But yet there's so much that doesn't fit. And that's what keeps this an interesting case, because there's so much out there. And the more you get into it, the more you find. And then you're trying to put all the pieces together. And this one piece doesn't fit. And then you put the pieces together in a different way. But then that one piece doesn't fit. So it's interesting. Sooner or later, somebody's going to figure this out and be able to prove it, I think, beyond a doubt. But it's going to take for somebody with a lot of information, fresh sort of eyes, to look at the pieces, put them together, say the reason the pieces don't fit is because this piece is wrong or this piece is a lie, right? And if that one piece can be eliminated and everything else fits, then you're there. But that hasn't happened yet with this case. So it is a work in progress, and it was a long time ago, but it's not like it was, it was the 1890s. It's not like it was the 1500s, right? This isn't like an antiquated story. This is something that there were newspapers around, and there's a lot of information out there. There's the court transcripts, which record the conversations the policemen had with family members, and a lot of inconsistencies with those, a lot of tripping up with language, right? When you say this to someone and they answer this, and it's not exactly the answer to the question that was asked. A lot of that stuff in the court transcripts, if you go that deep into it, it's interesting because, of course, the shape of the answer coming is not necessarily, it's what wants to be said, right? Not necessarily a direct answer to a direct question. So that says a lot too. But it's something you can research if you're interested in. How do you leave a bloody crime scene without footprints or shoe patterns? Absolutely, that was a huge problem. And that brought people back to the idea that Lizzie did it in the nude, which is an added layer of horror to this, just picturing, just looking around. I'm just so scared when I think about this, Casey. It gets me all nervous. Um, yeah, picturing this woman kind of tiptoeing around nude, super unexpected, right? With all of the clothing that they wore in these days. Um, she would have to put it back on and well, I mean, she wouldn't have to put it on in a super hurry because Bridget, according to everybody, is upstairs asleep. The mother's already dead. There's no one else home. The father's not. Well, he was home from his rounds. As soon as he laid down, he was killed. So there's nobody else expected. So she would, I would think, have time to put her clothing back on. Would she need help to put her clothing back on? I never thought about that because if she needed help to put her clothing back on, like corset and all, then Bridget would have had to have helped her. I mean, I never thought about that angle until this second, but usually Victorian women wearing that kind of costume did need help to get dressed. So I don't know. There's a lot to it. Yeah, good thought. See, it's so interesting to hash it out. It's more fun to hash it out in person. It'd be fun to just sit down and have like a night of talking about it somewhere in Fall River after touring the house. But their floor plans for the house are online too. They're in this great slideshow. But there's lots of information out there. There's even comic books on Lizzie Borden. I have a really good one, very, very nonfiction-y, right? It's not fantastical. It's not supposed to like knock your socks off. It's supposed to give you like the core information, right? Just very neutral. But there's a lot of information out there. It's a lot of fun. It's a lot of fun. Um, there's a book I think also called The New Bedford Tragedy, something like that. And there's one called The Lizzie Borden Case or something. I've read all of these older books from like the 1950s, 1960s, and they're all worth a read. It's a lot of fun. The further back you go, the more opinion is involved. So be careful of that if you're trying to form an unbiased opinion. But I hope it was a fun episode. A bit spooky for Halloween. Happy Halloween, everybody. I'm going to finish a couple of orders and then I've got to get going on my scarecrow poncho for tonight, or I'm going to be one cold scarecrow. I hope everybody's going to have a good night tonight. Happy trick or treats. I hope it's whatever you want it to be, little friends at the door or a nice quiet night. But in any case, I will see you Wednesday, and we are kind of going back to our normal traditional programming. We're going to be looking at the work of Joanne Wood, who is the woman that I visited last Friday. Hundreds and hundreds of rugs there. That is a big story to unfold, and it's going to be a super fun issue on Wednesday. Her work has not been seen at all, so it will be a lot of fun looking at those rugs. We're not going to look at hundreds of them. It's too much, but we're going to look at the one she's got up in her house and learn a little bit about Joanne. What a wonderful woman. Rug hooking, she's now 84 years old, rug hooking since she was 19 years old. Learned from her mother. No classes for either of them. Just figured it out, did it. Lifelong passions. Amazing, right? So that's coming up for you on Wednesday at coffee time. I will see you then at noon Eastern Standard Time. Until then, thank you. Have a great day. Looking spooky. Looking spooky.